Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from, here on this big, beautiful planet of ours. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where we challenge our listeners to dig a little deeper, learn a little more, and explore a lot more. Before I begin, as usual, I would encourage people that if you're listening to this later on YouTube, to click on the link that's provided on the right-hand side, check out my website, and also subscribe to my YouTube station. Keep up on new shows as they are processed and put out there on the web. Anyway, what I'd like to do tonight is deal with this issue. It's a very important issue, I think. I think it's one of the most vital issues, and that is that, we've dealt with many times how the media is not really our friends, okay? The mainstream corporate media. They present themselves as they are our friends. They present themselves in their own media, of course. The media tells us through the media that they're trustworthy, that they are there to keep an eye out for corruption. And then they'll often do these little stories where they'll find some corrupt, chicken farmer somewhere in Arkansas and do a big expose on him and like, whoa, we found this guy. But yet we have so much corruption in the, federal government that they don't even really touch. And in fact, we're having to rely on WikiLeaks and so forth to find out what's going on out in the world. And, and the journalists are actually condemning the people that are doing their job and exposing things. But, that's not my main point here. My main point is that the media, but also in all of its comprehensive forms, and also the society in general is really, really not into the idea of promoting self-esteem. I know that's a often misused term, but I'm using it here basically in the context of feeling value in yourself. They don't promote the idea that you should feel good about yourself from a, spiritual, metaphysical viewpoint. The media doesn't do that. The society doesn't do it. In fact, I would actually say you could even call it a conspiracy to just basically keep you down, keep you depressed, keep you feeling inadequate. In fact, that's how we could just even title this whole presentation tonight. How the society wants you to be inadequate. Now, I remember looking at this meme one time. It's quite interesting. It shows a woman. It's more of a silhouette, but she's wearing like this really thin veil type thing. So and the sunlight's shining. You can tell she's nude, but you can't see anything. And it said, what would happen to the people who make money off promoting the idea that women are ugly, basically? What would happen to that industry if women all woke up tomorrow and understood just how special their bodies are? And the answer to that is basically there'd be a lot of companies that would go out of business. And I'm not just singling this on women. It's also aimed at men too. I will talk a lot about women because you see it most evidently. But our society is geared towards, and it has been ever since we replaced our ideals, whether they be a sense of a kind of a national pride or a pride in our religious ideals, or even something extending from the rationality schools out of the Enlightenment. When we replaced those things with consumerism, around 1910 to 1920, And, Edward Bernays was really the father of that, okay? There were others. He wasn't alone. But the idea that we become a wants-based society instead of a needs. Because industry was producing so much more than it did before. In the old days, maybe 150 years ago, if you wanted a cigarette, you either rolled it yourself or the cigarette was rolled in a company that employed people whose job it was to roll them and put them in little like matchboxes and then sell them. But when you were able to mass produce those, when they learned how to do that, that meant that you had things coming off assembly lines, all kinds of products. And you know what? If people only bought those products to, when they needed them, and they, like, for instance, clothing, if they wore their clothes until they wore out, our economy as we know it today would totally not exist. Okay? We're based on the idea that you buy it, you use it, you throw it away. And that doesn't include, that's not like food, okay? Obviously you don't reuse your food. But it has to do with, you can buy a coat, you wear it for, well, the ideal from the fashion industry is you wear it that year because it's in style, and then you throw it away and get a new one. This is something that your ancestors would have thought was awful. Because in like the 1800s, you bought something, you used it, and that's the reason why you bought it. The advertising would say, this will last for years. These shoes won't wear out. This coat you can wear to your church meeting between being married and being buried. Okay? Seriously. You'll have this suit when you're married and when you're buried, decades later. That was what was ideal. Nowadays, the idea that you would wear the same clothes. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, when the fashion thing really started taking off beyond what it used to be. And the thing is that, yeah, you could two things. You could buy a pair of pants that was just a regular non-special label, or you could be part of the inner group and you could buy one that cost 3 times more, probably the same pair of pants, really, but it had a designer label on it. And also, I remember how people would sometimes make fun of teachers who, they looked through the school albums and they found the teacher, I don't know, let's just make up a name, Mr. Roberts, and they look, and they, I graduated in 1979, so maybe you looked at the school photo catalog album in 1965, and Mr. Roberts is wearing the same suit that he wore in the picture that he took in 1979. And then people would think, that's really funny. The thing is that we've become a culture that kind of would mock these kinds of things. And it's not good for us. It's not good for us at all. Now, let's take a look at, I'm just going to zero in on children first. Okay? Children. Did you know? What I'd like you to do, too, if you want some extra information, look up a documentary called Consuming Kids. You can find it on YouTube. And the thing is that they actually employ psychologists and even anthropologists to follow children. Okay? Now, they don't, of course, the parents are getting paid for this. Okay? They're not just like some creepy person following these kids. But maybe you have a 4-year-old and you make a deal with the parents. And you're trying to find out how that child will interact with a bar of soap. Yeah, actually, yeah, true. A bar of soap. So you watch how that child will make a preference for the soap because of its color, because of its texture, how much they'll lather up with it. And then you can determine what 4 to 6-year-olds prefer with soap. And then you can determine what kind of slogan you can put on the bar. Oh my gosh. When I was a kid, I remember, this is kind of funny. I just remembered that. That my parents one time, they'd get this, we had a bathtub, we didn't have a shower. And they would buy Mr. Bubble, for taking baths. And there was one time they couldn't buy Mr. Bubble. They had to get another brand. And I was actually upset about that. I was like, that's not going to make as many, I mean, I may have been like 5 years old. That's not going to make as many bubbles as the other one. I was convinced because I thought the other one is the one that will be the most fun to use. And, you know, the thing is, kids have developed an emotional attachment. They think with the feelings when it comes to products. And so the marketers employ psychologists and anthropologists to see what they can do to get more kids of a certain age to identify with whatever the product is, and then sell it to them. All right? And make it part of their emotional experience, who they are, and so forth. And on top of that, you have this thing where the marketer wants to find out maybe what's missing in that child's life. What is the worries that children have of that age? And then you can sell to them and also create product loyalty that will last throughout their whole lives. You get them, I can't remember which restaurant chain it was. It said if you get them when they're a kid, you've got them for life. Okay? That's what is going on out there. And you don't know it. You don't see it. You know, you're just like, well, that's cute, you know, and that sort of thing. You don't analyze what forces are being played on your children to get them not just to buy things, but my gosh, even a lot of the children's cartoons nowadays are designed to indoctrinate them a certain way, get them believing a certain way, get them to behave a certain way. Okay? They're not those fun cartoons that, you know, necessarily, and not all cartoons are like this, but there's a lot of them out there because I've sat through cartoons with all my kids, and it's even more of an evolution to nowadays. You see that, my gosh, you know, it's almost like, you know, some sort. It's not just storytelling. It's like, okay, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. Okay, Tom and Jerry. I mean, what was right and wrong was just Tom trying to get his hands on Jerry, and Jerry trying to get away and doing nasty things to Tom. Or, you know, Bugs Bunny. You know, kind of the same things. But, you know, a lot of the cartoons that are, you know, the kids' cartoons now, they are masterfully constructed. Okay, now if once a child gets through being, oh, by the way, with the children's thing, talk about guilt complex. You want to make the parents feel guilty so they'll buy more stuff for their kids. Okay? You get the parents feeling guilty because they don't spend enough time with their kids, or when they do get home from working 2 jobs or whatever, you know, mom works, dad works, or maybe dad works 1.5 jobs or whatever. You get. Anyway, had some problems there with Skype again. Anyway, the thing is that we have this guilt thing going on. It's called the nag factor. All right? You try to get the children to nag their parents to buy you things because, you know, again, you got that guilt because you're not spending enough time with your kids. So then you get the nag factor coming in. The kids are kind of trained like, can you buy this? 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 And then when the kid gets it, they're like, oh, this is boring. And you just spent like $50 or $100. The way that things are operating when it comes to advertising and so forth is you're trying to make sure that now the kid focuses on something else that'll make them feel a little better, and they start nagging you about another toy. Okay? It's sort of like that whole concept is like, you know, you got a bag of potato chips and you take a few and you're kind of full. You've got, okay, I've satisfied my craving, but then you hit that one that's got all the nice spices on it, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to eat a few more, but you can't find another one that has the spices on it until you've eaten another handful, and then you hit one with spices, and then you're looking for another high, basically. Well, the same goes for selling toys and stuff to kids. It's the same concept. So we spoil the kids. We give them an expectation that what counts is what they have. They start looking at each other. Oh, look, I've got a better bike than you do. And, of course, the kid doesn't have the good bike. He feels bad, goes to mom and dad, says my bike sucks. And you feel like either, A, you've got to tell him, well, you know, tough, you know, that's the bike you're going to have, or you go out and buy another bike. Okay, we've got this culture that's going on in the schools where people compare more and more and more and more and more. Wasn't quite that way back in the 70s and even the early 80s. But you had a lot more control before the deregulation took place than you do today on these kinds of things. Now, on top of this now, let's say you start graduating to now you're like 12 years old. Yeah. And now you don't have the toy industry, because most of them are like, okay, unless the kid's a nerd, they're not buying stuff. You know what I mean by nerd is they're buying, still Batman figures and stuff like that. However, you get to this age and now marketing kicks in just like puberty. It's gonna go full blast. And let's just aim at females right now. Let's take a look at females. Girls want to fit in. They want, it's part of, women really do have a dynamic in which there's more of a cooperative spirit. Let's get everyone happy and so forth. And we could go into evolutionary psychology and that sort of thing to show how this operates. But generally speaking, you get a group of guys together, they're all competing with each other, they're loud, they're like, I'm better at this, and there's kind of that rivalry that you get. Whereas women, it's not quite that way. And if it does get out of hand, then it gets really bloody. But ultimately, females are more into cooperation and fitting into the society. Now, the advertisers know this. So therefore, they are going to aim at creating an image these girls have that they're inadequate. That if they wear these clothes, they don't fit in. They're outsiders. Oh my gosh, that's horrible to a 13-year-old. Okay? A 13-year-old, when you tell them you're an outsider, is going to totally be like, oh no, that's not what I want to be. Most of them. Okay? If the kid does want to paint their hair blue and be part of the outsiders, the first thing she's going to want to do is find other people who share the same attitudes so that she can be an outsider with an inside group. Now, the thing is, this is not saying that young girls want to be manipulated. It's saying that there are people out there, the society in general, and the people that make money off manipulation that are trying to then capitalize on inner drives that person has. Just like a pornographer might want to, capitalize on the idea that young men, I'm not just saying young men, but young men have all these hormones going through their bodies, and their interest in sex is, skyrocketing when they're teenagers, and therefore, well, of course, they're going to be easy to entice to, watch movies. And, of course, they will deny that, but at the same time, I don't know if the industry in general is really trying to curb this sort of thing. I mean, maybe they are. I'm not an expert on porn. But the thing is, when we go into this idea of young girls who are being manipulated, take a look at these kinds of magazines that are aimed at them. It's not the kind of stuff that's aimed at boys. Okay, now I'm going to sound like some sort of feminist, but I don't care. You get magazines for boys, and it's talking about camping and sports and stuff like this. With girls, it's, oh my gosh, are you using the right makeup? Are you doing this and this and this and this and this and this and this? And the stuff that, is supposed to be aimed at older kids, they know that most of the people that are reading these are the young girls just starting puberty. Okay? 10, 11, 12 years old. And they're learning this is what the person has to look like. This is what a young woman should be wearing. This is what a young person should be thinking. These are the values that a young girl should have. Okay? Now, and you can influence behavior really easy. I mean, come on, back in 1914 or 15, a large magazine in New York was what got women to start shaving their bodies. Now, you can be for, against, whatever, I don't care. But you got to admit that the societal changes that took place because of this were not because suddenly some woman was sitting there going, hey, wait a minute, I don't like this hair on my legs. I think I'll shave it off. Okay? They've been surviving for thousands of years with it. And all of a sudden, now they're shaving it. Well, that is because the society was telling them that they're ugly if they don't. Okay? And that you can see that. I mean, there are professors that do studies where they have women in the audience. Okay, now they're probably feminists. I don't know, but at the same time, they have women in their classes, and they offer them like extra credit, or they give them an assignment. Stop shaving for the school year, and then write about it. Okay, and find out. And my gosh, many of them practically have nervous breakdowns because of how they're violating a norm in society. Well, that norm was established by somebody. It was magazines, and it connects to the fashion industry, which reinforces it. And of course, nowadays, that's reinforced by the lingerie industry, which was kind of like a fringe industry until the early 80s or something. Then it got mainstreamed. And then the porn industry, which then caused women to basically think, oh my gosh, head to toe, I've got to get rid of all that hair. Okay, but, and again, you could think, well, is that good, bad, whatever? I don't know. However, it is something that society was able to influence. Okay? It was a societal idea. It came from people who most women never heard about. And these norms got created, and then they're reinforced in the society, and they're accepted. The same way of, normal. Well, I was going to get into something else here, but first, let's just stick with this. Now, the thing is that you try to make sure that the people who have the money are the ones you aim most of your ads to. And that's why, for instance, the demographic in America that is the most depressed and anxious is white females, teenage females. Okay? And, you might think, well, why is that? Well, there's a lot of different variables that you could look at, but I think actually one of the ones you should really look at is the fact that they're the ones that the advertisers really, really target. Because they figure, rightly or wrongly, that they have a higher income at home than maybe other demographics. So you really target them. You really want them to accept these new fashions. And, buy this. Oh my gosh, don't worry, you don't want to sweat. Okay, that's the end of your social life if someone sees a little sweat on you. And then on top of that, oh, what hairstyle you got this year? Look at this movie star who's got this hairstyle. So you're out there trying to make your hair look like hers. And then at the same time, you're looking at these movie stars. They are photoshopped, and it's beyond Photoshop, okay? It's like digitization in which you can go in and you give people different eye colors depending on what's in that year, or lip size, or whatever. I mean, these people don't actually exist that you see on the front covers of magazines. But the thing is that you want to make sure that there's this ideal that you can never reach unless you buy things. When's the last time the magazines that are aimed at young girls tell them, hey, do you want to really like your body? Go out and exercise and get yourself in really good shape. And don't worry about what people say about how you dress, because you should look at the inner you. You're right. You're not going to see articles like that. And if they do exist, they're going to be once in a while, peppered in. I've never seen one personally. Maybe I'm wrong. But what would happen if young girls were like, you know what, I'm just going to go out. I'm going to get myself in really good physical condition. I'm not going to worry about, if I want to use some makeup, I'll use it. If I don't, whatever. And, the clothes I wear are what I kind of like myself, not what's advertised. And if you could do that, of course, you're going to have advertisements hitting you constantly. And so therefore, it may be that you like something because you're being told you like it all the time. It would absolutely crash a lot of industries out there that depend on these young women feeling bad about themselves. And when they feel bad about themselves, and this is true for young boys too, when you make someone feel bad about themselves, they are psychologically vulnerable for you to then create a new person. Okay? And that is very dangerous. You can create someone out of what you've crafted. Brainwashers do this. You destroy the... I use this in my third book, where the heroine is kidnapped by this crazy serial killer who wants her to be an apprentice. So first he has to destroy who she is first in order to make her into what he wants her to be. Okay? And this is what the society does. The society, you'd think, I think probably the people that are least vulnerable to this are those young people who are raised in homes that, I don't care, hippies, I think probably they're not as vulnerable to this. People that, not just religious, but the ones who really analyze religion. See, I make a difference there. There's a certain type of person who, they belong to their religion, and they just read the rules. Okay, we got to live this way. Everyone at church dresses this way. They're almost as bad as people that follow the advertising trends. Oh, you got to wear this color of shirt. You got to do this. You got to do that. Look at the people down the street that go to our church. You got to be as good as them. And, it's almost as bad. But then there's there's the kind of people, I would actually say more genuine people, who they believe in all of their religion, and they really adapt to it. But at the same time, they are encouraging not just themselves, but also their children to think, to ponder, to analyze, and, not just follow something because everyone else is, but to follow it because maybe you read your scriptures and all this, and you're going, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the way people live nowadays, and you start to question. Okay? And I don't mean like, oh my gosh, my scriptures suck. No, it's because if you start learning how to differentiate between the things your society says and the things that your religion says, and I'm assuming most people listening to this are a member of one of the Abrahamic religions, then that is when you're not vulnerable to when the society says something contradictory. But most people just accept it. It's just like you could be for or against or whatever, but I pointed this out in programs I've done before on family size, that there are organizations. I mean, seriously, I read their literature, watch their video presentations, that they say, we're going to get people to want smaller families because we'll present small families as the ideal on TV, and we'll present late marriage as the ideal, and we'll present the idea that children are a choice rather than something you just assume you're going to someday have. And that gets people to, start going for their birth rates go down from maybe like in Brazil where, 20, 30 years ago, the average woman had like 6 kids, to now it's right around 2. And probably will decrease. The thing is that you present an ideal. It doesn't have to be real, but you present a story. It's just like advertising. It's all the same. It's propagandizing. You got to buy this, you got to buy that. Take a look at your toothbrush commercials sometimes. How many people use as much toothpaste as they put on those brushes? But they're trying to encourage you to use a lot so that your toothpaste runs out quicker. Okay? It's all part of making you believe something that will benefit whatever the agenda is behind the people that are in charge of the message. Okay? Now, you can sit there and say, well, yeah, but I don't want people, in poor countries having oodles of kids when their country's already poor. And that's a valid point. But at the same time, when you're thinking that, you got to come up with a philosophical justification of manipulating people. Okay? You're not educating, you're manipulating. And so you might say, well, that's not as effective. Well, then you're saying that it's okay to brainwash. It's okay to tell people they should be this way, and not really tell them why, but just make it to where it's very miserable if they're not that way. Okay? That they're going to feel bad. They're going to feel like they're not really as good as they should be. You're going to use guilt. You're going to use persuasion that has nothing to do with the intellect, but all to do with the emotions. And that, I think, is to a large degree what governs our society today. We're not an intellectual society anymore. Heck, look at the school books that they have in American public schools on any subjects and compare them to like 50 years ago. I mean, it's a huge difference. 50 years ago, and then you compare 50 years ago to 50 years before that. And then people will say, well, yeah, but only the well-to-do kids went to school 100 years ago. Well, but were those kids biologically different? Okay? I mean, we have the assumption now that with our public school system, there should be people of all ages, and I mean, not ages, but of all economic backgrounds in many cases in the same schools. And yet, in America, I'm not speaking for other countries, in America, we see kind of a lowering of expectations. But yet at the same time that kids can't identify where Canada is on a world map, they can identify all of the trade names, symbols of the major restaurants and the major, they know the characters from all of the children's cartoons when they're young, and then when they're older, they can identify the cast members of whatever primetime TV shows are popular at that time. They may not know their history, but they can recite who died and when on Game of Thrones, if they're watching Game of Thrones. They may not really understand a class where you're dealing with society, but at the same time, they could tell you what caused the failure of the governor on The Walking Dead. So we've got to kind of turn this around and realize that we really are being played. Oh, one other thing I want to point out there. Now we're going to go for the adults, because I'm not going to just aim at the children and the teenagers. What about our consumer society when it comes to quality? Okay? We've got to a point, not only do we want to throw our clothes away when they kind of wear out, but we throw our furniture away. We want to, my kitchen's not in style anymore. You know what? When your great-great-grandparents had a kitchen, what they did was they bought furniture that they felt, this will be so durable, my children will fight over who gets the kitchen table when I die. Okay? There was really this kind of ethic, that you bought stuff quality. You bought something like a bookshelf that it took two people, huffing and puffing up the stairs to carry up the stairs when you're moving. Okay? But it's durable. These things, we had a durable culture. Maybe when you were poor, you bought that stupid, linoleum table that you had back when you were in college or something, warming up your ramen. Oh, that was, your table. All right. But the first thing you did when you moved up in your economic class, you got rid of it and replaced it. But you replaced it with something that was maybe something you wanted to keep permanently. All right. Your bed. Many people can remember that their parents' bed, the bed frame, stuff like that. That's what they had for years. Remember what I said about you when in the 1800s you buy a suit to get married in, and you were also buried in it a few decades later? Well, that was the same way when you bought the furniture that was in the home that was going to stay in the home, that you wanted to keep, that you saved your money up for that special table, bookshelf, entertainment center, and bed, and all of these other things. But now you bring your furniture home. Many people bring their furniture home in a box and they screw it together, or they go and buy something that's been produced in some country, off in Indonesia or something like that, and then they buy it when it's on sale, and they bring it in, and they know full well that this thing it may cost a quarter of what going out and buying an actual kitchen table that is made and probably delivered by delivery people, and they carry it in and put it in your kitchen. It's going to maybe cost a quarter of that. But you know something? That kitchen that you would buy that would be quality, that's a kitchen that's going to last more than 4 times. Anyway, the thing that I was trying to emphasize is not so much that, any kind of particular furniture style, because that's not the main point here. The point is developing a sense of permanence. And I think that basically, if you live in a superficial culture with superficial and temporary trends and preferences and those kinds of things, then you ultimately end up with superficial people who are governed by those trends and will actually, as we see with consumerism, the idea of the disposable society, everything, family, friendships, community relations, and so forth, become temporary. They become something that is something we use for the moment when we need to, and when we don't need it, we just kind of forget about it. And while I don't think most people currently live that way, I think there is a possibility, and I see the trends all over, that we could wind up like that. And I think one of the reasons why we don't see permanence when it comes to relationships in regards to establishing relationships is because of this superficial society. Okay, we got young people, of this generation in particular, who are scared to death to form lasting relationships with people. They are, and at the same time, they don't necessarily see the advantages because they've been brought up with an idea that everything is based on a cost-benefit analysis. So instead of, that kind of longing to share life with someone, that longing to connect to someone, to build a family, they instead look at everything like, well, does this benefit me? Can I get these things some other way? Can I find substitutions? Should I own a dog or a cat instead of having a baby? Should I just have monogamous, serial monogamy? Something where, you find someone, you really relate to them, but once you start kind of getting bored with them, which of course in any relationship, it's not so much a boredom, but you kind of become used to the person. You finish their sentences before they finish them and that sort of thing. Then it's time for a trade-in. And to get that high, that dopamine high that occurs when you're infatuated with someone and you're in the process of courting them. So we have a situation in which instead of someone, feeling like, okay, well, I can have someone here, we'll share life, we'll grow old together. Instead, it becomes a situation where you're just kind of like, okay, well, either one extreme, where you have a lot of young men in particular, but not just young men, they're satisfied with living in a world of gaming and pornography, which gives them their dopamine highs without any kind of obligations. You have people who are essentially live in a fantasy land. But this fits very well into consumer culture because if you realize the fact that single people, unattached people, people that do not have significant others and don't have children are better consumers. They spend more. My gosh, if you're a travel agent and you're trying to sell trips abroad, it's much easier to sell those in San Francisco, where there is a low marriage rate as opposed to the rest of the population, than you would sell it, in a very low, it's like the lowest, at least in the middle class neighborhoods of San Francisco, it's the lowest birth rate in the United States. It was easier to sell luxurious trips there than it would be in Orem, Utah, in which even though you do have a prosperous community for the most part, a middle-class community, you have a lot of people who are Mormon and they have big families. And so a little harder to sell a trip to the Bahamas or a worldwide excursion to someone who then has to think, well, should I bring the kids or am I going to feel guilty? Maybe we'll just load the kids up and go to Yellowstone instead, in the car or the van or whatever. And so the consumer society, that part that is more high-end luxury, is more geared to single people and double income, no kid people. Now, of course, that a society cannot continue that way. A society will crash. That was one of the reasons for the Roman society to collapse. Now, of course, you had other things like devaluation of currency, not being able to control their borders. So, when people from other groups of people kind of moved in and put pressure on the society. Those things happened, but at the same time, you had a significant drop in the birth rate amongst the people who did have property and did have social status. And eventually the society collapsed because it just kind of lost its meaning, so to speak. And that's a very important point, because our society has lost its meaning. What is it to be part of Western civilization? Western civilization is more than just some literature class that you may have had to have taken in college or university. It is a culture. It's a variety of cultures that kind of circulate around certain focal points, of which we don't have time to get into just yet. But Western society itself has kind of lost its bearing. It has everything dealing with the present, but not the future. That's a big difference between Asian society and today's Western areas. The Asian society is based on the concept of you look to what's going to happen tomorrow and what's going to happen next year and what's going to happen 10 years from now. That's why they save so much money as a percentage of their income. Western people are looking at what feels good now. And it's not part of their genetics. It's not something that they came up with just on their own. This has been part of a process that has come down from the top down. Okay? And again, look up Edward Bernays. My gosh, the only thing you have to do is go into Google and just type in quotes Edward Bernays, the guy that founded advertising, as I said earlier, and you will see that he was very clear that our values and so forth come from, the media and from social institutions we belong to, that they get filtered down to us. Remember, filtered down to us. Okay? Very few authentic cultural norms that come from the bottom up. So ultimately, this is why such things as religion and a sense of connection to your ancestors is highly threatening, because it threatens the whole ability to be able to, control populations, to control people. If you try to sell certain gimmicks and fads and trends, and this is keep at the superficial level, and even values, though, let's go a little deeper, to someone who has no bearing. What was it? Martin Luther King, who said, "Those who believe in nothing will fall for anything." It's much easier to move them, much easier if they're fragmented as a people, to get them to do whatever you want, as long as you have a really good PR system that you can, move populations along. However, if you go up to someone and you say, "Oh, here's what I would like you to do. It's really the in thing to do," and they have some sort of thing that they consider more important than your message or what you're selling to them, that's based on some sort of, appealing to your subconscious, there's a very good chance they'll reject you. Okay? There's an extremely good chance they'll reject you. And just to look at what's in today's society, if you took what's on TV on prime time today, and you could go back in your time machine and go back to, 1960, and play just what's normal for everyday TV to an audience in 1960, they would totally freak out. So you can't do it really quick. You got to do it slow, little by little. I don't know whether it's true or not, but the whole thing about the putting a frog in water and then just turning the heat up slowly, and he'll just sit there. Well, the thing is, that's the way people are. It's a process of long-term desensitization. And then they become receptive to whatever you're trying to sell them. So ultimately then, again, the powers that be have to make sure that you don't have those anchors. You don't have those things that you grab onto. To a large degree, I would say Christianity, I note this in my 5th book, Freedom from Conscience, The Price of Power. The monologue that the villain in that show, in that book, it would be a great show actually, but in the book, he gives to the main character that basically you have people that are controlled, that throughout the decades you've been able to castrate Christianity. Okay, you've been able to castrate Christianity. It's no longer a political force, really. It's not a social force. As Gandhi said, if you think you can divorce politics from religion, you understand neither. And the thing is that people's values and it create internal mechanisms by which they see the world, or schema. And if you can in some way separate their beliefs from their actions, then you can lead them anyway. And that's why you can go into a society that calls itself Christian, like, Northwestern Europe. The average person, if you ask them, even they may be agnostic, they'll say, well, yeah, I guess I'm Christian. But then you start asking them questions about various aspects of the Bible, and they'll say they totally disagree with you. Well, ultimately, they're disagreeing with the Bible because what you've done is you've separated their belief system from their actions, their action system. So we have and it's happening more and more in the United States, where someone maybe, I don't know, you may have some young college girl in a threesome with two guys, and she has a cross on and a Bible sitting on her nightstand. The thing is that we've marginalized Christianity, and therefore we've castrated it. And I do believe that, the various people that kind of, the movers and shakers, the powers that be in this world, are going to target Islam next, because Islam is the last authentic religion that actually incorporates its beliefs into its actions, including its legal system and its basic cultural value system. And that cannot exist simultaneously with a society that's based on consumerism. So I think the process that took, I would say if you go talk about the fast forwarding, this goes back a long time, but fast forwarding, I'd say about 50 years it took to completely complete the process of castrating Christianity. I think it'll take a little bit less time because we have better technology now. We have better social media and so forth. But it will take a few decades, and Islam will be in the same boat as Christianity. People will believe, they may go to mosque, but they won't necessarily follow through with actions. They will become secularized. You may see, nowadays with like in Turkey, you see more of a nationalist movement, maybe yearning back for those days of the Ottoman Empire. With that, there will be a certain conservatism. But as many speakers have stated, this process of globalization and consumerism is going to move forward. And those basic movements that are out there that might say, wait a minute, we don't like this. We might like the technology, but we don't like the cultural aspects. Those will be pushed aside. And again, they'll be marginalized slowly, until finally they're incorporated. Okay? So this is a process that, people will say, well, yeah, this religion's favored over this religion. No. If you're someone who looks at the world and you kind of want this sort of Star Trek Federation sort of society, that means every movement, every religion, every philosophy has to conform to that. So therefore, you have a situation in which you're going to see more and more negativity, towards traditionalism. Now, so what can you do? What can you do to combat this within your own society, no matter who you are, and also, more importantly, within your own family. What can you do to kind of, I guess, inoculate those around you against this onslaught of temporaryism? I would call it almost, to a sense, temporaryism, because ultimately the idea is that you should change your values, you should change the way you see life, the same way you change your clothes, the same way you develop a new style, the same way you buy a new car style, and so forth, and music and all these other things, that you're supposed to just kind of go with the times. And I think that ultimately is something you can actually resist. Okay? It's not insurmountable. This is not some sort of alien invasion where they control the world, like, what was the name of that movie? They Live, where, the aliens have taken they've taken over all of the means of communication and production and so forth, and no one can see it unless you wear special sunglasses. I don't think we're at that stage, okay? I think pretty much everyone on this world is a mammal. There's not an elite group of reptiles. But at the same time, there are people that have a lot more power than you do, and a lot more power than I do, and they can get their message out so easily now. Social media is not necessarily an organic phenomena. Sure, you can jump in and you can do things, but there's people out there that have a lot of money and a lot of power that can produce a video and throw it out there on Facebook, and all of a sudden it has 17 million views. Okay? So you're thinking, so what can I do? Well, there's a lot of things you can do. For one thing, I would say, and this starts at home, okay? Kind of a microeconomic way of looking at things. What you can do, ultimately, is, try to incorporate the idea amongst your children of tradition, of permanence. Now, one of the things I would do, beyond just the idea of, not throwing all the furniture away every day and, whenever you get bored with it. No, something deeper. There's simple things you can do. Have your children make things. That's right. It used to be that a kid, if they wanted a toy, like a toy boat or a toy gun or even a doll, those things were expensive. And that was up until even I would say the late 60s or early 70s, that toys were fairly expensive. And so maybe a kid got one toy for Christmas. And a lot of times what they would do is, if they didn't have a toy, let's say their neighbor boy, Johnny had just got a new pistol set, cowboy pistol set for his Christmas present. Then if you didn't have that really neat pistol set, of course you felt like, I wish I had one. But you wouldn't just sit there and nag your parents all day long. If they just said no, it usually meant, well, that's pretty much no. What you would do is you and your friend who were playing with them would find some sticks, and maybe even take a knife of some sort, a pocket knife, a Boy Scout knife, and whittle it to where it would look actually like a gun. And then you'd go out there and play with, and there was nothing wrong with that. There was nothing wrong with that at all. If you wanted to play boats, you didn't go and say, I want a remote control boat, Mommy. Maybe the rich kids did, but for the most part, most people didn't. So what did they do? They would actually, start nailing some scrap wood together and make a boat out of it, and then go ahead and float it. And that created, the sense of appreciation when they did get something that was super special. But it also gave them a sense of creativity. They knew what went into it. They knew it wasn't easy to make something that was complicated. And it gave them patience. My gosh, we have kids that have trouble with math now because they don't have patience. It's not that they don't have intelligence. Okay? It has to do with patience. And, if you're raised up on TV that's just completely, do this experiment. Please do this experiment. Go outside unless you live in an apartment on the 30th floor. Go outside and look through the window at your TV in the living room on a regular TV show, and watch the flicker rate. How many times it changes the scene. My gosh, it's like being in a 1970s disco. It's Studio 54 or whatever it was, I don't remember. But the thing is, it's flashing back and forth, because they've determined that they want to keep your attention. So if they change the scenes quick, then it keeps your attention. The problem is, the more you change scenes, the slower your attention span is. So therefore, you have to change it quick, like this. And you compare that to maybe a movie or a TV series that was made in the 1970s. You can easily do that. Just go to one of the cable networks where they play these and watch the changing of the scenes there. It's very slow. They might zero in on a conversation and very, very little change. Nowadays, a conversation is just like almost sending you into an epileptic seizure if you're so disposed. I mean, back and forth. Try to do that experiment and realize, my gosh, no wonder kids can't sit and read books now. It's just too slow. And you need to really employ imagination in young people nowadays. If you don't, you're going to lose. You're going to lose big time. And also patience. Now, there's other things you can do as well. You can study this topic, okay? Don't just settle on this or my word for something. Go out there and study it. Study what is out there in marketing psychology. Just look it up. There's a lot of documentaries out there that expose the way marketing is nowadays and the way our consumer society is heading. It's interesting. It's really fascinating. It's also fun. Way better than your average primetime TV show. By the way, try another experiment. Cut your TV viewing in half. I mean, I used to watch TV all the time, okay? I mean, when I was a kid, it would be like, okay, well, 9 o'clock, my favorite show's on, and I would wait. Well, the thing is, nowadays, even though we have all these choices, and it kind of contributes to some problems there, be selective. Be very selective. Just try cutting it in half. See what happens when you do that. And finally, you just really need to be aware of these things. As the Bible says, be as wise as a serpent, but was harmless as a lamb or something like that. You need to know what the serpent's up to. Okay, that means you need to be as wise as they are and informed. And when you are, you'll be able to counter this superficial consumeristic society, ideologically and behaviorally, both within yourself and your family, and then also the community once you start kind of speaking up against this. Anyway, that's all for this show. I thank you for tuning in and invite you to come back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV platforms.
Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.